Search and Rescue. Lara Fordis' job as a market researcher for cannabis brands means she regularly deep dives into consumer trends and retail data. But at a time when many brands are struggling to remain profitable, given market challenges, are they going about things the right way? What are they missing? We find out more. Hello and welcome to the Lobsterpot podcast. I am your host, Dave Barton from Thermidor. And today we have a lovely guest all the way from the USA. We have Lara Fordis from Fordis Consulting. How are you doing, Lara? You okay?
I'm doing well. I'm here in Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado, where Mork and Mindy were from. Is that right?
You may be right. I hadn't heard that TV show name in quite a while.
That's again, that just goes to show that I have anyway, whatever that says about me, but it's not about me. Today it's about you, and you're a market researcher working in the cannabis sector. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. Well, I've been in cannabis for about 5.5, 6 years. But I've been in market research for, over 20. And I'm sort of an accidental cannabis market research expert, okay, which kind of came about because I was doing work in CBD skincare. And so there's sort of a natural evolution to that. And then I found that ironically, my objectivity when it comes to cannabis, because I don't have a long history with it, it isn't part of my personal agenda, made me really adept at asking the kind of questions that people want to know, because I don't have a preconceived idea coming into cannabis brands, whether it be marketing or messaging or consumer trial. And so for the last 5 years or so, I've worked with brands to come up with innovative ways to try products. That's probably what I'm most known for, and also thought leadership. There's a couple areas in cannabis where I feel like the industry has really done themselves a disservice. And I feel like as a market research person, I owe it to encourage the industry to have higher standards.
Okay, cool. No, that's really interesting. So, I mean, obviously, being in Colorado, you're kind of, I'd imagine it's kind of hard to sort of avoid being involved in cannabis in some capacity, given how the industry works over there. But yeah, in terms of the sorts of, again, you've kind of touched upon the different areas that you cover. What kind of work, I guess, and what kind of brands have you been working with, if you can name some of them? And yeah, what's kind of interesting about the way you've seen the industry evolve?
Well, over the last 5 years, I've worked with some names that I don't know internationally how visible they are, but a place like Kiva, which is based in California, and they're known for Camino, but they have a variety of products and jetty extracts. Ironically, I moved from California to Colorado, and I've done very little work with Colorado-based companies. I end up getting an excuse to come back to California to work with companies, both brands as well as ancillary products. So products that encourage the better humidity control with cannabis, keeping it fresher. So I've done a lot of work with pre-rolls and flour in that regard.
Okay, very cool. And in terms of, I guess, the sorts of work, sort of diving into the sort of the data, the trends, what kind of things what's been kind of interesting that you sort of uncovered, and how has that sort of formed? Have you sort of put that back into sort of brand strategy, I guess?
Well, one thing that I noticed early on in working with cannabis is that everyone was competing for the same customers or potential customers. So everyone competing for the same metaphorical slice of the pie. And I started looking around at that, and I did some self-funded studies to better understand the industry. And based on the trajectory of cannabis becoming legal recreationally or for adult use, depending on how you think of it, there was a lot of opportunity with people who were what I'd call canna curious, meaning, it can be interpreted multiple ways, but the way I was thinking of it, people who, like myself, maybe we tried cannabis in the 1980s and not since, and we have a preconceived notion based on, Reagan era programming about what it is. And ultimately what I cared about was making sure that people make decisions based on accurate data. And when you're making decisions about what you use or don't use based on an antiquated experience, could be decades old, could be years old, you can't figure out what makes sense for you. So I saw people consuming opiates, but then being hesitant to try, a joint, and things that were really incongruous. And even though I didn't personally consume, I feel fundamentally, it sounds very probably American, that people should have the freedom of choice to consume what they want and do what they want, so long as they're not hurting other people. Yeah. And I saw a lot of people making uninformed decisions and making judgments based on outdated or anecdotal information. So my original agenda, so to speak, was to provide people information that was accurate. And one thing I saw was this canna-curious trend. So instead of everyone competing for the same slice of the pie and the heavy users, I'm like, expand your fucking pie. Look at all these people that could, they may not start out as heavy consumers, but their first basket size is going to be considerable, and they're probably not going to be. Yeah, they're just look at it from a different perspective. And so I was pretty focused on let's get information and education out so people can make an informed decision. And by that nature, you're going to have people who over time are going to become heavy consumers, and they don't have the legacy market experience. So they're likely to actually spend more over time in a dispensary besides their first basket size.
That's really interesting, because we have medical cannabis here in the UK. So one of the biggest challenges that we have, only, I think it's around 50,000 patients now in a nation of 67 million people. So again, it's minimal in terms of the percentage. But again, a lot of the stigma around cannabis, around, getting people to try cannabis or to consider it as a medical option, stems from the fact they tried it when they were a youngster and had maybe had an experience they didn't like, or got some bad quality stuff. And so therefore, there is that stigma that persists. But again, there is that kind of curious perception as well that I think plays into the medical. And it's interesting to hear it. It's coming from the kind of adult use recreational space as well, that information, advice, all of that is so vital to basically getting people to kind of consider. And it's interesting to hear it from a kind of retail perspective too. So what kind of initiatives did you kind of take based on, once you identified that was a sort of market segment that brands should pursue? What was kind of the next step to kind of get that information out there?
Well, this was the data I collected was in 2020 to 21. It was late 2020 to 21. And I started looking at brands, talking to brands about, could we make this more inclusive? Does every picture in a cannabis themed magazine have to have some cool looking 20-something millennial with aviator glasses on? Or can we consider this a more potentially inclusive, less off-putting way to encourage people to at least be open-minded, get educated, try it. I've done focus groups and interviews with bud tenders. How do you help inform people so that they can make smart decisions? Now, in terms of the medical cannabis, I also, in the last few years, have been focused on the concept of what I call an invisible shopper. So it's the people who consume cannabis, but they never hit the retail data. So it's, anecdotally, everyone I know has either purchased something for someone or received something from someone, even though, at least here, and I'm assuming in a place like the UK, that is completely not okay and not legal. But that's often how people access cannabis. And I would think in a place where it's restricted like the UK, even more so. So for a long time, well, I guess still now, there's what I would consider a myopic emphasis on retail data. So I go into a dispensary and I'm purchasing something, and I'm not going to say it, but I'm also purchasing for my mom who has arthritis. I'm purchasing a cream for her. And I'm also purchasing for my friend who likes, vapes and and I see that they're on sale. And so when I leave that store, it looks like I'm consuming more than I actually do, because there's a conflation of purchasers and consumers as if they're the same people. And as someone who's done work in CPG and in grocery stores, we know that's just not the way people shop. Like if I have a partner, I'm not going to say like, I'm going to the dispo, every man and woman for himself, like I'm obviously going to.
You don't come with me, you don't get anything. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just not the way humans shop. So ironically, in the US at least, I felt the industry was doing themselves a disservice, because they're actually underrepresenting how many people actually consume cannabis, and they're overestimating how much people themselves consume, because they can't discern between what's intended for them and what's intended for other people that they're purchasing for. And because retail data is the way in which people make most decisions, I've spoken at a few conferences asking people to reassess, like, is that really representative of your target audience? What else can you learn? Are we as an industry hampering ourselves from being more mainstream because we're acting as if grandmothers and government workers and people who work with children don't consume cannabis, but they actually do. They're just getting it through an intermediary, essentially.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to kind of bring that back to brands and what they can do with that sort of insight. I mean, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, the idea that as long as they're getting people buying, does it really matter? I know you're going to tell me to the contrary, but yes, that if we look at it from that perspective, as long as you see that, we're selling this much product, however many times a week, therefore we know basically what we're going to need to bring in or what we're going to need to produce. How does it follow that having an awareness of this kind of broader path to conversion, for whatever we want to call it, how does that, what can they do with that information? How can they make more sales or help more people? That kind of information.
No, that's an excellent point, because bottom line, it's about revenue and profitability. And, I may have, maybe it's a naive agenda, but I feel like there should have been earlier on, and now there is more messaging to people that you don't associate with cannabis, the middle-aged moms, people who are older and have ailments. And while you want to watch for contraindications with pharmaceuticals, at least here in the US, opiates is a big issue. And as you get older, there's more back pains, there's just more general pains, and being able to make an educated decision to segue to that. Now, for the strictly recreational, we just want to have fun and get high, I think there's legitimacy in that. I have some issues with the language about recreational use, because I think anything that makes you feel better, I consider inherently therapeutic. It may not be medical.
100%.
Sense.
I agree. I think that even people who would say that they're recreational users, like you say, are kind of really don't realize they're using it therapeutically. But again, that's a whole other debate. But I agree. I do agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, if I go in to buy a keg at the liquor store, no one's going to be like, wow, that woman must have a problem. She's going to drink that whole keg herself. Like, we act as if what you purchase in a dispensary is going to be for personal consumption. And obviously it's not. But how is the metaphorical drink after dinner, how is that any less therapeutic in its intent than a joint or
No.
an edible or what have you. And I'm not here to proselytize one being better or worse. Like, yeah, if you have a liver issue, maybe not edibles because those go to your liver, but maybe a vaporizer is a good choice. Like, I'm not here to judge. I just feel like people should have access and be able to make the decision that's right for them, so long as it's not hurting others in the process.
Well, it's really interesting to hear you use the kind of language you are around, like I say, around the kind of recreational or adult use consumption, because again, this ties back with a lot of the things that are happening in the medical market I see here and elsewhere. But I suppose, again, thinking about going back to the idea around people buying for friends and family in dispensaries and things like that, I guess from the perspective of like, how do you kind of do a lot of outreach? And I guess it's kind of the idea of, if you can get the influence of someone who will then tell someone else to go and buy it for them. And I suppose it's that sort of chain effect, isn't it? That the person might not be directly going to make that purchase, like you say, maybe an older person or something like that who doesn't go out as much, but they'll still be asking their friend or their son or daughter, whoever, to kind of, oh, I've seen this on TV, or I've seen this in the magazine, or I was looking at this online. I could really use some of that. Can you go and find it for me next time you go to the dispensary? And I suppose that's kind of more the path to conversion that we're talking about. And it's taking those messages to that demographic in order to kind of join the dots as such. Is that?
Yeah. And some, I was just talking to David Palachuk about this yesterday, and there is a movement towards brands having more of a national reputation, so to speak. And so, for instance, when brands are going into another state, oftentimes, they've heard of it, especially from California. Like I know bud
That's a
tenders.
brand in itself, yeah.
Yeah,
it becomes a brand in itself, Californian weed, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You've heard of the name, and then they
Cookies,
ask for it.
yeah.
So a lot of a lot of movement in that area. But one thing that I think is interesting for brands is, how do you differentiate yourself? Just like in another, how do you have a reputation? So for instance, with Jetty extracts, they are known more in California for like cleaner, like being cleaner, and because there's been so much press about pesticides and what's in vapes, that's part of their brand equity. Or Camino Edibles, which is a subset of Kiva, has a very strong reputation. They do sleep gum, all sorts of gummies.
Yeah.
And so understanding what's going to resonate with a larger audience, and what space can they own. As you know, like whenever it's like, it's the best, like, best is so empty. It's
subjective.
And it always cracks me up when I pass by some place. It's like, we have world famous burger. It's like, I'm sure like it just,
it doesn't really mean anything. If everywhere's the best and the biggest and the world's most famous, then it becomes immaterial, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so I'll do that. Like with one client, we were looking at messaging, and there's types of market research. I do qualitative and quantitative, like called a max differential study, where you make trade-offs and figure out what the message is that's going to rise to the top. Because sometimes what you think as a marketer, an advertiser, or brand manager, your hunch is that, oh, this is good, everyone's going to love this, this is the way to go. Sometimes that isn't, that doesn't turn out to be what resonates with your current, let alone potential consumers, something that can be inadvertently off-putting. And so because packaging is so limited in what you can say and the space that you have, picking the words and messages that are going to resonate there versus should be on a website versus should be in some other form of, an email communication is important, because the space is so limited. So I'll help them with package testing, message testing, but also really creative product testing, because here understandably, you can't, it's not like a granola bar where you can, set up in a mall and,
Yeah, go and
intercept
start
people
selling,
to try your
sell them
product.
on the back of the car, whatever,
Yeah,
Yeah,
give out samples at the baseball game. Like, you just
yeah,
can't do that.
right.
So I've been kind of shocked I've had clients, multi-state operators, and when I look at the data on who actually tried the products, like 13 employees, maybe a
Really?
dozen friends and family members. I'm like, wow, that is a self-selected and super
Yeah.
friggin' small sample. That's crazy.
That's like, that's like, well, my mum says it's good, so it must be sort of,
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
one of my more creative workarounds is I had a client who wanted to grind, roll, and smoke weed, or see how people grind
Mhm.
the weed and roll it and smoke it. And like, how are we gonna do this? And there are some ways to do it, but you have to do it in people's homes.
Right.
But what I discovered is that if you have an Airbnb, you can't necessarily do it in an Airbnb. Most of them you can't smoke.
Yeah.
But I knew someone who had an RV zoned for Airbnb usage.
Mhm.
And so I had him drive down to Sacramento, and we parked in people's driveways, and we had them grind, roll, and smoke weed because it's legal and safe. And I didn't have to have them Uber anywhere. I didn't have
Yeah.
to worry about them,
Bring it to them and say,
their kids and
who doesn't want?
everything.
Yeah, we're bringing our weed wagon to your home. We're
Yeah.
gonna sit in your drive. Show us how are you? And I'm like, well, absolutely. How long can you stay?
Yeah, sometimes, so
Yeah.
I'm just good at coming up with creative ways to test things, or what's called in-home use tests. So for like sleep gummies, obviously, how do you test the efficacy of a sleep gummy? You get them into people's, you have them pick up the samples at the dispensary, or
Yeah.
in some states you can ship, and then we do a survey looking, when they started, and then find out how they felt in the morning and ask about taste and texture. And it's way better than hoping your employees just give you some self-selected feedback.
This is the thing about data. Again, as someone on similar but kind of different side of marketing, the whole idea of, especially online data to kind of verify anything, that path to conversion, it doesn't directly correlate with what you see statistically. There's always, and like you were saying, this whole idea of, people influencing other people to go buy products for them. It's like, it reminds me of this idea of like dark social, as in like, someone has seen your message somewhere, and maybe they didn't interact with it, they didn't like it, or they didn't, but they've still seen it. And that doesn't necessarily, and you might have more people inquiring about your service or product or whatever it is that way. So the data could be completely different to what you've put out, what you're seeing versus what the response is. And I suppose it's as a market researcher, how do you kind of reconcile those things in a way? It's to kind of say when the data just doesn't seem to fit with what you're seeing.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, for instance, if the quantitative or online data, it doesn't fit with what you're seeing in the marketplace.
Yes.
Well, customer journeys tend to have to be, qualitative in nature, and certainly what people say they'll do or say they'll pay for doesn't always align with what they'll actually do. So, for instance, I did some work with what are the levers, like what pushes someone from being kind of curious in 1 minute to in another minute being willing to try something. And in the data that I collected, the suggestion, based on some video work, and so, is that they want like a medical endorsement, not like from a cannabis, theme thing, but like they want Johns Hopkins or Harvard or some credible medical source to tell them it's okay, which kind of surprised me. And again, like I can't do thousands, so I didn't bother releasing that data because I could, my sense was that what they said they wanted, that there was something deeper there. There's, that was that an excuse, or is that really what's hampering them? And what can brands really do about that?
Yeah. And that would be for a recreational use. They're still looking for some sort of checkbox from a kind of authoritative medical related or medical adjacent kind of organization to kind of say, actually, this is okay. Like the Surgeon General warnings type thing.
Yes, they want something to allay their concerns, or at least that's what they were saying in video. But when I looked at the quantitative, it didn't seem to align. So if I'm doing something research wise that I could, say that this is it, but like my gut tells me like it really needs, you need to look at the data a little differently. I'll kind of, caveat that. But I'm still very interested in like, what is the messaging that is really going to get people to convert from Canna Curious to trial? And in my experience, it's usually like what I can see is it's really word of mouth for the most part. It's a trusted friend, family member, colleague that makes you, says, hey, like I've been using ibuprofen in copious amounts every day, and now I tried this and it works better, or you sleep better, or whatever. So I don't have the answer for that, but
I think sometimes there aren't the answers. All we can do is ask more different or better questions, right? And I think that's true of so much in life, just generally. The answers aren't always there, but we can kind of get more insight through asking those questions, can't we? And I think but it's really it's really interesting that that approach is so integral to, I mean, it's evidence that this is a professional industry. There is money moving through this. People, cannabis brands are taking this seriously. It's not just, bag of weed, who wants some kind of thing, and it's really, and again, it feels we're quite removed from that market sophistication, at least from a consumer perspective here in the UK. But again, it's interesting to see that approach is being taken in, I guess, recreational markets. But again, I think for me, the whole idea around sort of medical cannabis and, brands wanting to get into kind of new markets and things like that I think is an interesting challenge. And I don't know if you've had any experience with that, but again, when you have a lot of producers, say, particularly from sort of Canada or Australia, I think South Africa to some extent, coming into markets like the UK or, where there's a medical market, and trying to position themselves, that it presents a different challenge. And I guess because, again, the pharmacy sort of model here is more about what's available, what fits a certain type of criteria, what's the THC to CBD ratio, what's the terpene profile and things like that. And I guess that's all still quite important to a sophisticated consumer in a recreational market. But to think of, how do, it's interesting to say, word of mouth, it's still very much, I tried this, it worked for me, why don't you give it a go kind of thing. It still comes down to that, very much that, third party endorsement.
And also, I mean, and I'm not an expert on the medical market because all of my brands are in the recreational / adult use space. But in states where there aren't a lot of options, you only know what you know. I mean, unless you're like someone from Los Angeles and all of a sudden you're traveling to Oklahoma, like you'll notice the difference. But for the most part, you only know what you know. And so if what you knew was what you tried in the 80s or the 90s in a little bag, and you go into a dispensary and you have 3 choices with a relatively or into a medical pharmacy or wherever it is, and you only have a few choices, you make your decision based on the choices. You're probably not going to leave and say like, oh, nothing's good enough for me. And so I imagine packaging and messaging in a place in the UK or in markets where there aren't a lot of choices looks very different. And that's probably why most of my clients are in California.
This is the kind of, we just have a standard, but I mean, this is big, nasty medical, So again, he's a kind of UK hip hop artist who's obviously a big fan of cannabis, and he's launched his own kind of medical brand. And again, it's not like kind of maybe it's kind of like burner light kind of thing, if you like. But at the same time, it goes to show that people from, and again, we're seeing this more and more, sort of legacy operators coming into the medical market. And I think I think it's a brilliant thing. I think it's awesome. I think it's a natural progression towards a kind of, a more robust market, because people who have been, in the kind of legacy market, they understand what good product looks like. And so that gives me personally confidence if it's come from that kind of source. But then for other people, it will be, well, I don't want, that association with my medicine. And I think that's, again, this is the whole spectrum of cannabis. How can it be something that in an oil form can, stop seizures in kids, and the other time, it's great for a Friday night? It just seems completely, incongruous. But like you say, it's all therapeutic, I think, at the end of the day.
And I think of celebrity endorsements like Cheech and Chong are probably not going to come out with a medical product, that would not be on brand. I mean, maybe they have one and I'm speaking naively, but there's just certain brands, like are associated with more fun or recreational use, and which I would say still has a therapeutic value. And some have a more like, if it's targeted for physical aches and pains and or ADHD or PTSD or other things, that's different. So like one of my studies came out and that showed that a lot of people during work hours are consuming, are on full dose, not microdose, full dose cannabis. And I remember talking to someone in New Jersey, and they were like, well, we can't let people see this. And it's like, what I realized was people presume, even people in the industry, that like, if they're consuming cannabis, they're impaired or altered. When I know quite a lot of people, creatives, knowledge workers, otherwise, who do their job better when they're consuming. And so while you may think that that's a problem for the workforce, I would contend that depends what strain, it depends who they are, it depends what they're trying to accomplish. It's unlike alcohol, where it's not a universal depressant, obviously, but the lack of awareness and lack of education leads people to draw conclusions that somehow cannabis, you can't be as productive. They don't understand the nuances, and that people may be using it so they can just friggin' show up for their job without trying, or stay focused on a task. But
this is it. But then, like you say, the idea of messaging and I think what struck me when I was, I think, in the US a little while ago, looking at sort of different sort of products and sort of edibles and things like that. I think one in particular, it talked about, the packaging was like, sleep or something, or relaxation. That actually saying what the effect will be seems to be it seems like a smart play, because people don't know otherwise. But if you kind of make it clear, this is for that, this is for something else, then that starts to sort of, and you make that part of the brand as well, and it gives people more of an indication about what it's for. And I think almost like the use case as such, has to be part of that. And I've heard people talk about before, like, benefit maximization and what to do, and, really mindful consumption. What do you want to do? What do you want to feel? What kind of mood do you want to enhance or decrease or whatever? And I think even though that seems like a really productive and, useful way of labeling products, I still think a lot of people just don't believe that it can be all of those things and more.
Well, it's interesting because my understanding of that, that naming was because at least in the US, you can't make effects-based claims. So you
Yes.
can't say this product will help you sleep,
Yeah.
but you just can call it sleep.
Yes. Okay.
Or
That's just
like
its name, honest. It doesn't make you go to sleep. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
There was this company called 1906.
Okay, yeah.
They've actually made a big change, but like this is the kind of thing that they'll do. It's called Go or it's called Genius or whatever. This because they can't say this will make you smarter. Now, 1906 is kind of an interesting case because they actually got away from selling in dispensaries and they're now direct to consumer in a lot of states. But that's because, or at least in my perception, a lot of their ingredients create the effect, so they can stay under that minimum, or maximum THC dosage, and they can sell direct to consumers. But I'm trying to think of the examples that I have around, but the naming oftentimes is a way to get away from having to make a claim. So they can say love or bliss or happy, but they can't say it'll make you feel blissful or happy.
No, just but that's it. I mean, again, like you say, one of the things that always gets me about the cannabis industry is there's always a workaround, and needs to be. And I think, again, until there is a kind of, and I'm not sure that will ever stop, to be honest. Actually, I'm not sure there's going to be a kind of, inflection point where it's like everything's legal and we can say what we want about it and we can do this, that, and the other. Certainly not. Well, not here, and maybe not in the US. I don't know. But again, it just always keep trying and keep striving to find new and interesting and effective ways to kind of engage with consumers and to kind of give them that information without actually doing any breaking any laws, and staying compliant and doing the right thing. So again, it just goes to show that work like yours is so critical to all of this.
And people, you're right. There are a lot of workarounds. Right now, there is a big movement towards like hemp-based beverages. That's a kind of big thing, at least here in the U.S., especially in Minnesota. There's a hemp beverage alliance, and there has been a lot of controversy between like this loophole essentially. So you can have a hemp-based beverage and sell it in another place, and how like the difference between that and what you'd get at a dispensary may ultimately not be that significant. You just do more, like you just drink more of it. So
exactly. So it's adulterating, intoxicating hemp and things like that. But again, it's just compounding the THC levels from different plants into one product, and essentially that's legal. But actually, if it was Delta 9, then you wouldn't be able to have it in pretty much any state.
It's just a lot of inconsistency, and certainly, I think a lot of double standards when it comes to alcohol and tobacco and other things. Like tobacco has no, as far as I know, medicinal or therapeutic value other than like to calm people down. I know.
Well, I think nicotine itself and kind of how that's extracted and made into different product forms, whether it be what they call it, the snus pouches or kind of sublinguals and things like that. And again, I think it's a stimulant in the same way, but again, it's all the crap that goes along with the tobacco, isn't it? And again,
you've got energy drinks, like you've got people. I mean, coffee is certainly a socially acceptable mood alterant. So it just seems like my philosophy, which is if you're not hurting anyone else in the process. Now, like obviously, you can make indirect links that somewhere down the line someone is getting hurt. But I'm, in a general common sense way, if you want to have an energy drink and, or, a joint or, whiskey, like I don't personally care as long as it's not hurting me in the process. And I just think that there should be consistency about how we approach legislating and regulating and taxing things. And because when I first came into cannabis, I was like, why do all the places look so downtrodden? Like, couldn't they make them look more inviting? But because it's not federally legal, you can't there's no tax deductions for improving your outside or doing some of these things that would make a dispensary more inviting.
You can't write off the money that you spent. You just have to, it all just comes off the bottom line. And then lack of access to banking. So everyone needs cash. So if you've got, a couple of $1 million sitting cash in dispensary, what are you going to do? You need to hire security,
Yeah. I mean, I don't sell drugs, I don't sell marijuana, but like people, I'm like, well, I just help people sell drugs better. But like, the fact is, I don't personally do an exchange. My bank shut me down because they didn't like that it's a federal bank, and they didn't like that there was cannabis money moving in and out of my fund, and or out of the bank. And so it's like, that's ridiculous. I'm just like a nerd trying to help people with their advertising and messaging and make data-driven insights. But even I got shut down.
Yeah, but and it's legal where you are, and it's the crazy thing, isn't it? But no, you're quite right. Some sort of standardization and compliance. I mean, they're all necessary, but it doesn't need to be seen as kind of prohibitive. It's more about creating equality in a way, or giving a level playing field for everyone who wants to be involved in the sector to start from. And I certainly see the value there. It's but never a dull moment, is there? That's for sure.
No, and it's been very illuminating, as sort of someone with more of a background in CPG and originally with Fortune 500 companies, but now I've mostly worked with smaller and medium-sized companies, and seeing the lack of savvy in custom market research for cannabis. Because in other categories, there's value to market research, and that that's never like in the budget, or very rarely in the budget. And like I wouldn't want to make multi-million-dollar decisions based on hunches or gut feelings. That seems like a really bad idea.
With 10 of your best friends sort of thing, 100%.
But that's what's happening. But partially it's because people think they know better, and they think they know their customers better. And this applies to people who have been, legacy market, or, been involved in decades, and also for, people who come from other categories, this sort of arrogance or naivete that they can just go with what they feel is the right thing, and then point fingers otherwise when it doesn't work out so well.
There we go. That's just corporate life, though, isn't it? But no, you're quite right. I think if there's a silver lining to that, it's the case that the markets are, cannabis is professionalizing, and that can only be a good thing longer term, I think, for consumers, patients, everyone involved. So, there's a definite need for what you're doing. I see that. It's just, let's tell the rest of the world.
Yes, that consumer insights aren't just for cereal and biscuits. They're for all sorts of categories where you want to make data-driven decisions confidently. And just because it's a complex and regulated category doesn't mean that there aren't creative workarounds to get data that you can make decisions on, and aren't your self-selected Instagram following or your email list. Bad data is worse than no data at all sometimes, and I've seen that backfire as well.
That's fascinating. But no, it's been great to talk with you, Lara. Thank you so much for
talking to you. Thanks, Dave.
No problem. And we shall speak again soon, so thank you.
Okay, thanks. Have a great day.
You too. All the best. Cheers.